So welcome to Friday Night Live with Ken and Cheryl. She's Cheryl.
He's Ken.
And so we got an interesting guest we're going to bring in just a minute. He's got a fascinating history, and he works in a little different segment of the market than I usually talk to. So we're looking forward to learning from Kevin. But to start with, I'm going to share some bad news. Cheryl and I were supposed to be sitting, packing right now, getting ready to go to Miami tomorrow, flying to Barbados. And she tested positive. We had to go get the brain swab, and she tested positive. Now, the I don't want to say funny because it was the interesting thing, I guess we'll say, is how do you feel, Cheryl?
Fine. I have no idea when I caught COVID, but I was vaccinated. I got my booster. I get my flu shot every year. So I guess I fought it off except for the blood test.
Yeah, she had a little bit of sniffle that we assumed was allergies. We both get allergies this time of year, so it's just one of those things. We're not sure why or where. Also, do me a favor. Let us know where you're watching from. We have people on Facebook and on YouTube, but where in the world are you watching from? Cheryl and I are in the middle of North Carolina. If you pick the exact center of North Carolina, you'd be really close to where we live. Anyway, so we look forward to our discussion today. And let me bring in our guest, Kevin McDaniel. He is the editor-in-chief of accessible.com. I think I got that right. Let me bring him in. He can tell me if I got it wrong.
Hey, Ken. That's it. Hey, Ken. Hey, Cheryl. How are you?
Fine.
So tell us a little bit. I know you're the editor-in-chief, and I know you've had an interesting background in the industry. So tell us a little bit about what you've done and some of the, just a little bit of your background. I guess we'll start with that.
Sure. Yeah. And again, sorry to hear about your trip. That sounds like it was going to be great. Barbados. Wow. That's, yeah. Sorry to hear about that. But yeah, I've worked in accessibility since I finished college. I started in accessibility as not as an ADA coordinator, but I finished as an ADA coordinator in the city of Jacksonville. I was very blessed to get to work with a lot of folks in the independent living movement. And in Jacksonville, as all cities and municipalities have challenges, I had to work on a lot of the litigation and project management. And then after leaving Jacksonville 3 years ago, I came out to Colorado and spent some time working for the city of Colorado, as well as the state of California as a consultant, and now working as the editor-in-chief for accessibility.com. So I've since college, I've worked in accessibility, and I love it, of course. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're glad to have you on. And so let's talk a little bit about Jacksonville, because I know you were there through some challenges in moving Jacksonville toward becoming a more accessible place. So what are some of the things that you had to deal with in that role?
Yeah, I mean, Jacksonville's a unique place. It's the largest city by land area in the lower 48. It's something like 868 square miles. And we had in 2008, the Department of Justice, under it's a program called Project Civic Access, came out and investigated the city. This was before I was the ADA coordinator. And throughout that process, they went through and investigated facilities, roadways, curb cuts, technology, policy, procedures, the whole nine. When the Department of Justice comes, it's a pretty comprehensive investigation. And so I worked for a great the chief. The person who was chief before me, Beth Meyer, had done an incredible job of bringing all of those. We had several pieces of litigation we were working on at the time. And you got to understand, this is like all cities, a new administration, new initiatives, new objectives, and we were transitioning from an older mayor, and there was certainly a new priority to get these things right, and so. We had to do everything, starting with my former chief, from rebuilding buildings to laying down, $30-40 million worth of roads and curb ramps, to rebuilding our technological infrastructure to be accessible. And, I did a lot of the same out West. And so just had the opportunity to spend a lot of time. Again, I'm a big believer in being very close to the community and the independent living movement in particular, because your community is your guide. That's the best practice, understanding your community, nothing about us without us. And of course, I would think it's a shame that there aren't more travel channels in organizations like this that are embraced by more organizations, because they would not have 15,000, 16,000 broken wheelchairs a year from airlines. But sorry, I didn't mean to rant. That's
Well, that is, for most of us that travel, and we fly with our, Joe takes her wheelchair when we travel, and it's been broken and bent, and some of those things, they happen. And I'm not saying that it's ever intentional. I don't think that. It's just that there's a lot of pressure, and people don't take as much care as they could. It was interesting. I had a conversation with a young lady that needed her wheelchair. It was custom for her, and she checked it, and sure enough, it got bent, and then she couldn't use it, and so she had a very tough period of time till she could get her situation squared away again. So it is important, at all levels, that both from the government side and from the private sector, that they address the way they care for accessible. You and I talked earlier today, and everybody in my audience knows I'm really passionate about this and about accessibility information. So let me ask you, what are typically, so let's go back to Jacksonville. You mentioned street cutouts. Were there not street cutouts before? They weren't the right size? What did you have to do with those?
It was just, it's a typical, every city has the same kind of challenges where, as standards change, where a curb cut was required once before, it isn't required. Well, it wasn't required before, it's required now. We had in Jacksonville about 30,000 curb cuts to replace, and those were curb cuts attached to roadways that had been installed decades and decades ago. The trick to it was really, and I have to credit the person who really managed that part of the project, which is the ADA project manager, Mac Blanton, who still works in Jacksonville. And I hope he doesn't get upset if he sees this. But the trick to it was standardizing that process, and he did a great job with that. Standardizing the process and getting contractors all on the same page. That's the trick when you're dealing with that kind of volume. So it was, pulling curb cuts out, making sure the slopes worked, making sure that the path of travel was safe, making sure there was a good accessible route from those curb cuts to the closest entrance, all of those types of things. And it's just a massive construction project. I mean, it's we had to do things like replace entire floors of jails, rebuild some buildings, make other buildings accessible. I mean, it's I don't know what the total number is now, so I don't want to misspeak. But when I left Jacksonville, the project cost at that point was at over $100 million, and and of course we anticipated to continue to grow. That work will continue until 2034, which is the transition plan we submitted to the Department of Justice.
Wow. So that, and again, you don't necessarily think about it, because most of us, when we're dealing with an issue, it's one that we're worried about, because it's one we got to get across. I do have a good candidate for you for what you have done in the past. Is that somebody needs to go to New Orleans and have a conversation.
I have a friend in New Orleans now, actually. Yeah. I haven't been to New Orleans in 25 years, but I do have a friend. I don't want to say what his position is, because I would hate to put him on the spot. But is it bad in New Orleans, or is it?
Well, we were there. It's been 10 years, so it may be better now. I don't know, but a lot of cobblestones, which is a challenge in any kind of a wheelchair. But also because there's so much rain and so much water, most of the sidewalks slope, pretty good.
I think it's on purpose.
Yeah.
To protect the
there we go,
buildings.
like that. But when you're trying to push a manual wheelchair along that, you got to be pushing upstream all of the time, because it's drifting down all.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of fun, and a lot of places didn't have curb cutouts, those kinds of things.
Well, I'm sure their expenses from rebuilding after the hurricanes is just not leaving them funds to improve other items.
Yeah, that's we had that in Jacksonville, and of course every city's got that decorative brick layout at in different parts of the downtown, and you have to wonder, who knows the guy who sells bricks, because this wasn't, you know what I mean? because it's not even, it's obviously, an accessibility issue for mobility devices, but when you're driving over it and your car is bouncing, you're wondering, how did anyone think that this was an accessible route for anyone?
One thing
Yes, ma'am.
I say sometimes people don't want to see their cities incur the expense of the change, but usually I found once the changes are made, whether it's a building or whatever, then everybody likes it better. Everybody likes the doors that open easily. Everybody likes the curbs that they don't trip on, So it's at least that's something that the whole society seems to benefit once it's done.
Well, and they forget too where it came from. Accessibility. We talk about this all the time at accessibility.com, how accessibility breeds innovation. Diversity breeds innovation. There was actually a study of Morgan Stanley that talked about U.S. stocks that had diverse boardrooms that had accessibility practices performed like 1.5% better on average than other stocks in the same industry. But to your point about everyone liking it, I was in court one time on a court case, and particularly about it was a ticket. We used to write tickets on people who would park in disabled parking spaces, and there was a guy who parked in front of the accessible route, which by Florida statute is actually still a violation of the accessible parking space. So everything that's adjacent, your access lane, that attaches to an accessible route that gets you to the entrance. Technically, if you block the accessible route or the curb cut, you're still blocking the access lane. And to your point, the way they like those innovations so much, they actually forget where they came from. I had a judge tell me on a case they wanted to throw out that they wanted to throw it out because they thought that the curb cut was there for baby strollers and not a design standard from the UK code. It's what you take for granted,
Yeah, that is funny. Cheryl suffered though in New Orleans because sometimes with cobblestones or with brick pavers, the one thing that happens is sometimes they're missing, and if the guy pushing the wheelchair is not paying attention, it causes a pretty good thump at the least, and sometimes it causes people to almost leave the chair when the chair stops. And
I was thinking if you go there, you better get a seatbelt for your wheelchair.
Yeah. And I would contact risk management to that city too, to let them make sure they know, whenever there's damage like that. If you have a damaged wheelchair, you can contact them and have it right. I know that's not necessarily the point, but it's a shame. I know. Everybody's not going to call risk management, but like I said, until we find out who's selling all the bricks, it's going to be hard to find it.
Okay, so here's a trivia question, something I learned along the way. Do you know where cobblestones originally came from?
Would guess Europe, but I haven't. Rome, the Romans. I don't know.
No, actually, they were used as ballast in the ships.
Okay.
And sailing vessels, and so when they came to the colonies to pick up a load, if they picked up a heavy load, they had to take some of the ballast out, and so that's why they're so common in ports, because you see a lot of ports, from Boston, Charleston, pretty much it's a fairly standard form of pavement in the port because they had all these stones, and they were like, okay, let's make a road out of them. They're not those nice square bricks we have today, but they were just basically rocks that they carried to ballast the ship.
Oh, wow. Well, that makes sense. Yeah. I guess it's a couple different purposes for them. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I have no idea where I heard that trivia, but my mind is really good at remembering silly things.
Yeah.
I would ask too, since we know the United States has really been moving toward, most cities are moving toward being more accessible, and I think it's really improving a lot. What about the rest of the world? Because we want to go somewhere besides the States. So what do you see in other places?
Yeah, I mean, I actually see a lot of progress in other countries. There's you know, I know that there's still a lot of work to do, of course, but I've had the opportunity to travel to the Middle East and to Central America and Europe, and I've seen places where, I mean, forget about curb cuts, you can't even get down the street or get out of your house. They don't even build the homes to be accessible, but in 2007, and this was after my trip to the Middle East, the United Nations passed the convention. I believe it was called the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And so technically, any member of the United Nations is bound to the principles of that convention or that resolution. And accessibility and non-discrimination are baked into that. But there's still a lot of work to do. But yeah, I will tell you that there is progress. We did an article at accessibility.com about a law that was passed in Uganda that was based on the Convention for Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the United Nations, and it was pretty progressive, actually. They had pieces in there, of course, about non-discrimination and accessibility, but also about digital accessibility and building design standards. And Uganda's got the GDP of maybe 2 or 3% of America, but because they're a member of the United Nations, they're bound to this, to this resolution. So I'd say there's a lot of progress, but the problem is that you need more companies that there needs to be more of a standardized, best practice, that's filled with, just good pillars of accessibility, like inclusive practices, accessible buildings, care and understanding of who your customer base is. And even with that United Nations resolution, until we start looking at these laws as just a baseline and not the goal, we can't look at these laws like this is what we aspire to do. No, this is the baseline, And I think though that countries that have embraced more progressive accessibility standards are obviously going to reap the benefits. The accessibility market is huge. There's various estimates of between $7 and $17 trillion throughout the world of disposable income of persons with disabilities. And so, that's the kind of thing that people need to understand, that the more inclusive and accessible you are, obviously, the more beneficial it is to your organization, to your country, to your city, and first and foremost to the people who are traveling and trying to have a good experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been having conversations both for my channel and just in general lately, to the tune of, I think it was 27 this week, Zoom meetings. But one thing that it interests me is that in some places it seems so progressive. In other places, it seems so far behind. I was talking to a gentleman that does accessible travel. He's working on building accessible tours in Sri Lanka. And he said that one of the things that was interesting was that somebody built, modified some rooms to make them accessible. But he was like, well, it would have been better if he'd called me first, because they don't really necessarily know the standards. I know when we were in Mexico, we stayed in some all-inclusive resorts, and those resorts advertised having accessible rooms.
Yeah.
And at best, they were partially accessible. And some of it is so inexpensive because, in fact, I sent them a link to a Home Depot thing for the drop-down rails to go either side of the toilet. They were like $97 a piece. You can make the bathroom significantly better because if you need to get up off the toilet and you don't have the lower body strength to do it, it's your arm that has to do it. And if they had like a handle on the wall, and I'm like, well, maybe
you have to have long enough arms to reach.
Yeah.
And accessibility standards change over time. Like I know that at first the big thing was to have some kind of railing in the bathroom, but then as I got older, I realized I can't. It's really harder to reach behind me to find that one, handrail and one over here, and then push up. You get older, your shoulders can't do it anymore. But when the new ones they have that fold down on the side, Oh, you got two on one on each side. It's just like a wheelchair or walker. If you can do a wheelchair or walker, then you can use those. It's much better.
Yeah. Well, you just brought up something that I've never really thought about, but I guess I probably should have. That's what channels like this and your website, which I love, by the way, are so important, because when you talk about a handrail, I've seen folks who work in design and construction build these things, and you have to and I'm talking about at scale. When you're talking about installing 50,000 handrails across a county or a state, there's just a streamlined process that has to happen. And I remember having to work with folks and showing them picture by picture. Here's where it goes. Here's the height. But it's a little bit more complicated than that too, because it's also based on there's a variance that has to be considered. But when you brought up handrails in Mexico, I was thinking about one thing, and then I thought, sheesh, you got to be able to trust those handrails too. I mean, it's not a knock on Mexico, you know what I mean? But any country, it would be great to know, that these standards are followed. That's
Yeah, and one hotel we were at, you could see it was hanging out of the wall. I couldn't lean on it at all. I was like,
there wasn't a stud to hang out, and so they just put sheetrock screws in.
And after somebody else had used it before us, and it's just loose. And like, oh wow, yeah. But I like the one that folds down is kind of nice because it's kind of a U-shaped or D-shaped, maybe a D-shaped with a flat on the back. And so it gives you like an expanse of like 4 inches difference in leaning on it, because it's true, I'm kind of tall, but I have short bodies. But so you never know what you're really going to need. But they could make it like somebody can develop like a 6-inch one. That would really serve a lot of people,
Yeah. There should be, there's, of course, I believe there's now I'm not, facilities is not my first thing, but I believe that our ADA, our building code, our ADA building code, that section of it is actually an ISO standard now too. But, good luck getting every country to follow that, that standard. I mean, that's the thing, when a hotel says we have accessible rooms, okay, well, how high are your beds? Can you trust the handrails? What floor are they on? Do you have an accessible route to get out? All of these things that have to be considered. And then you have to look at the infrastructure of the community that you're going to. Are you going to a place, if you're a parent with a child with autism, are you going to a place where there are sensory rooms or safe spaces? Where there can be, you can take a time out. Are you traveling with airlines that don't do business in America? I know that that's more and more rare, but the further east or south that you go, it's more likely you could be traveling with an airline that isn't necessarily bound to the Air Carrier Access Act requirements. So there's a lot to consider, and I think that the site, this is why this site is so important, because you kind of are going into the unknown. When you go to a new place. You're hoping they're accessible, but their definition of accessible is very different than ours,
Yeah, you and I talked earlier. I'll share the story with the audience. One of the people that in her interview, I think it's Ashley Olson, was the person that her interview's on the site. It's kind of long, but she was talking about that she took a boat that had just like a short harbor cruise. They said they had an accessible bathroom, and they showed on their website, and in the description they showed a picture of the bathroom. It looked great. And when she got on the ship, the bathroom looked just like it did in the picture. But what they didn't show in the picture was there was a great big beam that she would had to have crawled over to get to the bathroom, because it was it's just the way they built the boat. And so you run into things like that so often where somebody thinks, well, this is good, I'll make it accessible, and they don't think about the route to get from where they are, where the person would be, to the restaurant.
Yeah, that's a shame. And then on top of that, there's of course, the challenges of I don't know why they would call that an accessible bathroom. I mean, did it have the turning radius? Did it have the is it 36-inch turn radius that was required?
I don't know, but I think it did have the handrails and the things that made it look accessible.
Yeah.
It looked really nice in the brochure.
Yeah.
Or on the website.
Right. Yeah. Take your best picture. You only get one chance for a first impression, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a conversation with some people in the last week or so about the fact that if you look at anybody's brochure, no matter what you're looking at, whether it's a cruise line or you look at it just doesn't really matter. All of the people you see in the brochures, the videos, everything that's used for marketing are all perfectly healthy, young, beautiful people,
Yeah.
And, it's like, okay, so we got to think about there are people that are not necessarily in that category. Let's make something so that they can see what it would be like for them. But,
Right.
that's the advertising people don't like that idea.
Have you or your audience ever, I know that you all share information back and forth. Have you ever thought about, before traveling as a resource, just reaching out to the municipality and finding out what disability advocacy groups there are in that area? Because I feel like they would probably give you a straighter, hey, this is actually what it looks like here. And here, because like I've been fortunate. I got to interview disability councils and groups from Turkey to Syria, to Russia, to Mexico, and they always have a very different perspective than, what's advertised. You know what I mean?
That's an excellent idea.
Yeah, I would say I will put that on my list because I do talk to like the Visitors Bureau a lot of times, and especially like I've done Alaska and places I've done a lot of work with. I did that with I've interviewed a couple of tourism directors in the islands, and ask about tourism. But I haven't ever thought about reaching out actually to the disability advocacy groups that might exist, because as you said, they will know for sure what's accessible and what's not.
Yeah, and they're going to be more likely to be able to give you some type of comparison, relatively speaking, because a lot of those groups, there's like sister city programs where, not only will we go out to those countries, but they'll come to our country as well to kind of, hey, list and compare. But the U.S., and I don't want to speak for other countries, but at least from a digital accessibility standpoint, I know Australia is very good. UK has some pretty good, at least has accessibility laws, a public and a private. And my only point is that I'm not going to say that America is the 100% leader in all things accessible. There are other countries that have had laws that stood longer, or that can't even be stronger, but we are certainly in the top. And so I think that a lot of those councils, they come here to kind of, hey, what does this look like against what we look like? So they'd be able to kind of give you, there's things in America you're used to, like, accessible route or automatic doors. That's not something that we talked about earlier about the innovation. People walking into convenience stores now are so used to just the doors opening, but that was initially there for mobility disabilities.
No, I hadn't even thought about that. Here's one thing, and I know you guys work. And actually, let me ask this question first. So tell me a little bit about what accessibility.com does.
Yeah, so we thank you for that question. So accessibility.com, we have our mission is to provide objective information about accessibility. I joined the group last year. One of the things that I really found, and I'm just going to give this explanation because I just love what they do. One of the things I found doing this job was that you kind of go through training. You learn the ADA laws, and you learn how to do certain little things. Like here's what the facility access looks like. Here's what the digital piece needs to look like. But what you don't learn through any of the training programs I'm aware of, is how to actually do the job. And what I mean by that is, getting in a position where your job is to tell a governor or a mayor or an executive or a CEO, here's what has to be done. And when they interview, they say, are you the guy who can tell me what has to be done? Sure. Yes. No problem. But when you tell them and then you tell them the cost, what you actually end up doing is going out and finding the money on your own, and it's more than an advocacy job. It's more like a project management role, and it's very difficult. There's a lot of levers you have to pull. You have to understand how to bring the rational and irrational together, and that can be either side at any time. There's what could be, what should be, and then there's what it will be. you know? And so after doing this for a while, I just found that, you know, there are people that are far more qualified and to speak on this than me, but I just felt my own personal feelings was that we go through these trainings and are really underqualified to actually carry out the task we're assigned to do. And that's really tough because the people that do this work really care. You know, they are members of the disability community. They have family. I have many family members who have disabilities. Without getting into all this, you know, but everyone who's doing this, believe it or not, is doing it because their heart's in it. They want to do the right thing. But when you get into that job and you can't, no matter how hard you try, you can't change something, it gets very frustrating. And it becomes kind of this pressure cooker, because not only can you not change it on the inside, but you're also getting pressure from the people you're trying to serve, your community, who don't understand why you can't do it. And now you're part of the problem. And that's not the important point, but the important point is to get the job done. And I just felt like I feel like the training that's provided doesn't prepare people for that role. So join accessibility.com, because I love what they do. You know, the goal is to provide objective information about accessibility. We speak to audiences that are at high level. We speak to audiences that are just getting started in accessibility. We provide conferences that are not just intended to be, hey, this is just a topic. We have a narrative, a start and a finish. Here's the topic, here's the problem, here's the solution, and here's the actions you can take to actually do it. And we can't, we're not a university. You can't train everyone overnight. You can't provide all this information, but that's why we try to work very closely with folks like yourself and other people in the accessibility business, because we don't have all the answers either. We want to bring those best practices to our readers so they don't have to have those same stumbling blocks, where you're beating your head against the wall for 2 or 3 years because there was just one little thing you didn't do. You didn't go get the buy-in of a director in some department because you didn't know you had to. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of stuff we want to help people, because we just want to help people get the job done. There's tens of thousands of ADA coordinators and accessibility professionals in the country who are trying every day, and I know them. I know most everyone I've ever met in the business are really great people, and it's just you just run into no, and you have to build up resilience to rejection, and you have to understand how to manage projects, and that's what we want. That's what we hope. Objective information that helps people do their jobs better.
It's interesting. I'll share one thing that one of the cruise lines, in fact, a couple of people have told me they've had to do this, that I thought was so useful. Is on one of the cruise lines we were on right before COVID struck, we were talking to the officers. We were invited to like a cocktail reception, and I told them about what I did. And he's like I want to say chief engineer, not the guy working on the engine, but the guy that manages all of the facilities, I guess the engineering types of facilities.
Probably works director or something like that.
Well, this is on a cruise ship, but
cruise ship.
Yeah, he was responsible for doors and making sure that accessibility was good. And what they did was he and his staff had to spend a week on the ship using some kind of mobility device. So either like a walker, a scooter, or a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And go all over the ship.
Yeah.
And he said it was amazing how many things. The ship was getting ready to go in for refit. He said it was amazing how many things they found that didn't work the way that they would have wanted them to work. And it showed in the aftermath that they had made so many changes. In fact, on that particular ship, Sean, I spent I think 3 nights or 4 nights on board. We found one door that really wasn't accessible, and they had a ramp, but the door was the door that went outside. It had a big heavy spring on it to make sure it stayed closed, and even with both of us, for me trying to hold the door open and then push with the other hand, it was just almost impossible. And so I told him about it, and he says, "Well, next time you need to go out that door, give me a call. I'll be there in 5 minutes and open it for you." But that was the only, and this was a door that I think it went to the jogging track, so it was not a high probability for most people in a wheelchair to be able to get out. And the ramp was fine; it was a little steep, but I mean it was better than not having a ramp.
Yeah, but that's one of the things that sometimes only a handicapped person can tell you where the real problem is. Like with this last cruise we were on, not all accessible cabins had, had a push button for the door. Ours did not. And I had a hard time, like, especially if I was tired that day, to hold the door open and get myself out, even in a scooter. It was hard. And I told them, well, the door is so heavy, that's the problem. And I'm glad they have a nice strong door and frame, but they need a button to really, like, if I was by myself, I need a button on it,
Yeah, it was a real awkward position to get to the cabin. The interesting thing was I did have a conversation after that with the director of ADA for the cruise line, and she immediately made notes and said she'd take care of it. And I also mentioned, because the person that was managing the dining room didn't think about the fact that they assigned two people with scooters to go into the far corner of the dining room,
and share a table.
And share a table, but it was like there was just no path to get from there to there very easily. And I mentioned to her that it would be a great idea to assign, take all the people that needed it accessible and assign their tables first close to the door, and then let everybody else get spread out. But and again, it amazes me because I have talked to I deal with a lot of the different cruise lines. Pam says I'll share Pam's post. And by the way, Pam, thanks for being here. The not having the automatic door. And the funny thing on this ship is some had automatic doors, some didn't, and it seemed to be random. And you're like, what?
I think maybe when the doors needed repair, that's when they installed it or something. Gradually getting all of them, but.
By the way, so for all of you that are listening, if you have questions for Kevin, feel free to post them in the comments or in the chat, and we'll take a shot at answering them for you. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, because I know we're about to switch topics, but I want to just say, Cheryl, you hit on a great point, which is something that this isn't really even a plug. I just really believe this, but the nothing about us without us, that you need to ask people with disabilities what works and what doesn't work. That's my biggest, to Pam, what Pam has to say here, a pet peeve. That's my biggest pet peeve about this industry, or folks that work in the industry in general, is that, just because, a good friend of mine said, would always say, you can be 100% compliant, but you'll never be 100% accessible. You just won't be, not to every person. And the best way to get around that is to actually work with and get feedback from people with disabilities. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. I have another friend. We were building a website, and I know this is digital technology related, but just as an example, building a website, and we got it finished. It was compliant with all the standards. I won't bore you with all the standards here, but it checked, it's done. And in this epic just takedown of us thinking that it was perfect and totally accessible, a friend of mine who has MS and limited mobility in both of her arms and all of her digits, and has to use her voice to access the internet. She turns on her assistive technology to access the website, and it took her 8 minutes to get to a page that would normally take 25 seconds, if you're just navigating it, getting to a page and scrolling down. And it's just because it's compliant doesn't mean it's accessible. And so I'm really big about it. We actually have a series on accessibility.com this year. I don't know if you know this, but 2022 marks the 50th anniversary of the independent living movement. And we're actually going around and interviewing Center for Independent Living directors and identifying barriers to independent living. And if you read any of my articles and a lot of our writers, you'll see that the theme is definitely in at least half the articles, anytime it's relevant, is, are you incorporating your community? Have you asked your community? Have you actually tested your product with a diverse cross-disability user group? Don't think because you've done it one way in one place that it's going to work in every place and that you just know the answers. I mean, the slope in Florida is much different than the slope in Colorado and California, and in the population, the majority of population who are deaf or hard of hearing in Colorado is much different than the population that is blind deaf in California, with all different solutions and mobility challenges. And so I'm just very much an advocate of bring your community to it. And so if I was traveling, to go back to that, I would definitely be looking at the community groups there and then asking the companies where I'm staying, have you solicited feedback from people with disabilities? Do you have you collected surveys? That's a really transparent thing for a company to do. Provide the surveys and the work that you've done, present it so that people understand what accessibility features you have and what feedback you have from the community. They don't do it, but they should. It'd be better business for them and obviously for the consumer. Sorry, I didn't mean to rant. That's
okay. I get off on rants too. Pam will tell you I have my share of pet peeves as well. But one of the things that it ties to that is too many times the cruise lines are doing a pretty good job of understanding this and training their staff. But too many times people don't understand enough about who they might be talking to. I might have mentioned this, but I was there's a company in the UK now that has a solution that I love. Is they have I forget the name of it. I apologize, but they basically have a subscription program for a company, like a store or something. It's kind of like you can think of it as an electronic concierge,
like customer service. Are you talking about the Neat Box?
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
I think that is such a great solution because people, and for example, people that have sensory disorders have different ways that they want to be approached and dealt with than somebody that's blind or deaf, for example, and they have different needs. Yeah. And so when somebody comes in the store, especially if it's a non-visible disability, so for example, somebody that is blind, it's usually fairly easily tell that they're blind. If somebody's deaf, a lot of times it doesn't take long to figure that out. But if you have somebody that has a sensory disorder, that may be a challenge to figure out. And it's so nice with that system that they can, tell the person in advance, don't look at me, don't touch me. This is what I need. You can show me things. You can talk to me. I won't talk back much. But give them the things that they need to facilitate it for that person, so that they get treated with the respect that they deserve, and then with understand. Actually, I don't think it's even a lack of respect. It's just a lack of understanding.
Oh, absolutely. That's what it is. I mean, it's a lack of understanding. It's my boss used to say indifference, and I think there is some of that, but I think it's just a lack of understanding. And we actually wrote an article about that called Lookism, and the basis of it at a very deep level is just the understanding and the way we process emotions and logic with. Anyway, but I love the Neat Box though. The guy who developed that name is Gavin Neat. He actually spoke at our conference last year, which if anybody's interested who's watching, those presentations are available on our website. But to your point, the reason I like that product too is because there's more than just, is your hotel accessible? Is the airline going to be accessible? Are they actually going to adhere to the things they're supposed to? It's things like, where are you going to eat? What kind of healthcare are you going to have access to if you get hurt? My niece, my niece has autism, and we had to take her to a hospital one night because she had a stomach ache. We took her to one of those urgent cares in Florida, and I won't say which one it is. I don't want to, but we took her there. And when we took her there, we said, her stomach hurts. And the doctor said, well, what's the problem? And he went to go touch her stomach. He went to go rub her stomach. She was only 8 or 9 years old at the time. And when he did, she jumped back, was kind of in shock, and he said, what's wrong? I said, well, she has autism. And so she doesn't want to be touched, and she's not going to communicate with you. She doesn't know you, And the doctor, and again, this is in America, so that's why it's such an important consideration even in other countries. The doctor said, "Okay, I can't help you. I can't help you. You're gonna have to take her to Wolfson's Children's Hospital. It's about 20 miles down the road." And, you know, it could have been devastating because we got down to that. We took her to the hospital and it was closed. I mean, he wanted us out of his urgent care facility so bad, he sent us to a closed children's hospital. And if something would have happened to her, you know, luckily we drove 20 miles back to a real hospital, and an open hospital. But those are the things you have to think about when you're traveling. You know, where's your health care? Where's your food, your accommodations? How do you get around? If your wheelchair is damaged, how do you get back? There's some really cool things happening. Have you guys heard of Revolve Air?
Yeah, I saw their name in something I read recently. I don't know much about them, but
yeah, there's a guy named Andre Michelin in I think he's in Germany. He invented something called the Revolve Air, and it's a wheelchair that can be folded up into the size of a suitcase and carried on as a carry-on.
We saw it. Yeah,
You saw that, yeah. We need more infrastructure like that, you know, because if you get hurt, you know, or your mobility equipment is damaged in another country. I mean, there's cases where people have had their mobility equipment damaged by the airline or damaged while they're in another country. They go home and, you know, the airline, of course, will have to replace their wheelchair. But, you know, I know of cases where people have developed bed sores, because they couldn't get around waiting for the wheelchair and passed away, unfortunately. So it's a real serious thing. There are risks involved in traveling. And that's why I said, you know, in the beginning, I love your website, because it's scary, you know?
Yeah, that's what we always say. Take lots of, make sure you have plenty of travel insurance, but that doesn't always solve your problem if they don't have what you need.
Right.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about that, and it's one of those things that I don't maybe not address enough, and I probably should add that to the list of things that I try to find out for people traveling. You know, it's funny because the first question I ask anybody that's in a place I have questions about, you know, about accessibility is, okay, do you have accessible bathrooms?
Yeah. Well, that's important. That's important. Yeah.
That's pretty up there on the list.
That's pretty high up on the list. Yeah.
But the same gal I was talking about earlier, she was telling me that about being in South America somewhere, and they were out and kind of got out away from the cities, and it took them a while to find a place that she could use the restroom. And you know, and I've got some people coming on, and so for the audience, we're going to be talking with some people from Africa. And that may be probably a pre-recorded interview, but about accessible safaris. You know, and anytime I talk to anybody that does an accessible tour, you know, that's like I said, that and bedrooms, you know, is okay. You know, what's the situation for sleeping? Because my idea of a safari is you're out in a tent somewhere, and in this case, oh, here you go. Okay, to your point.
Yeah. And that's great, Pam, you know, but the thing is, you know, if it works, it works. But a lot of people have very specially designed wheelchairs. You know, some of these wheelchairs cost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. You know, I have a friend who uses a wheelchair that Medicaid will only replace every 5 years. It's, you know, $28,000 wheelchair. And, you know, if it gets damaged, it's damaged. And the problem is that, and it's not indifference. It's training, but, you know, the airline guys, they treat these things like luggage instead of like they're an extension of a person's body. You know, you can't just take a wheelchair and throw it around because you think that's just a carry-on. No, that's part of someone's independence. You know what I mean? And especially when it's an expensive wheelchair like that. But I think that's great, Pam. It's really awesome that I've never heard of Scoot about, but that's awesome. I didn't mean to.
No, well, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
But you know, again, like you said, they don't realize that what they're doing could actually be life-threatening if they damage somebody's thing. I was again, something I read in the last few days was talking about that a lot of times, and you know, pretty much. Oh, okay, so we got somebody new here. That can't really use a standard wheelchair scooter, and so it is an issue. And that's it. I mean, literally, it can become life-threatening because some of them have to have straps for the upper body to hold a person that doesn't have torso strength. There are so many things that they may have to have access to that are so important. And Again, it's it's one of those conversations to have with the air carrier. And actually, I know somebody that might be able to arrange a conversation. I'll have to see if I can make that work. But the other thing is, and this is for everybody that's traveling. Most of the time, we depend on somebody in the airport, or at least we request somebody on the airport to push Cheryl so that we can get through, to the gate and all of that. Yeah. And actually, I'll tell a story too. But usually to the gate is where you run into a problem, where they may have a whole bunch of people sitting there, and there's lots of people that miss flights because they can't push the wheelchair themselves, especially if they're using if they checked their device, at the counter, and they're using one of those things that the airline people push you around on, or the red caps, right? They miss flights because somebody put them somewhere, parked them, never got back to them.
Oh yeah.
And so that's a challenge. It was interesting because it was coming back from, I guess it was on when we came back into Raleigh. We asked for some wheelchair assistance. So they brought a wheelchair down. Well, Cheryl's wheelchair's down there. She just needs somebody to push. Mm-hmm. The person that brought the wheelchair down just turned around, took the wheelchair, and left. And I found I have a bracket. I'll have to show that to one of these days, that now I can push it pretty easily with one hand because it goes across the back. Because it's really hard, especially if you're pulling like a carry-on, to try to push a wheelchair up a ramp with one hand on one side. Right. It doesn't want to steer straight, so I have a bar that goes across so I can push it in the middle, and then I just use my wrist kind of to direct it. But I mean, and it's just, that's a training issue. And the sad thing is we tip pretty good, when somebody helps us. Yeah. So that girl walked away from, a decent tip, and she could have just come back down after she got us up to the top, because that's all we need is the ramp. Sometimes the ramp is fairly flat and it's not a problem, but this one was uphill, and and you're just like, why? Yeah. That's the challenge. If you're traveling and you have carry-ons, add-ons, and I think that they say that when I was reading about this for a story a couple of months ago, they said that the average person with a disability travels with 2 other people, on average, and that we were doing a story about market share and stuff like that. But when you have all of that, extra luggage, everyone has their own carry-on, and, airports, they have to adhere to, a lot of different standards, local, federal, state, ADA standards. And if they're an airline, Air Carrier Access Act. But it doesn't mean that, like I said, go back to that same thing. It can be compliant. It doesn't mean it's 100% accessible. And that's why it's just so important for, organizations that you do business with to have a strong relationship with the community. Have you ever thought about asking where do you guys fly out of mostly, Raleigh? We fly out of Raleigh or Charlotte, depending on which airline. If we fly American, we fly out of Charlotte. And Charlotte is not my favorite airport. I mean,
it's big.
It's big, and the last couple times have been much better, but we flew out we were flying to Nassau in the Bahamas, and it took us 2.5 hours to get through security. Now, I always allow a lot of time because I'm always afraid of that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, 2.5 hours dealing with a wheelchair, trying to get through security and to get to the gate, and it was a nightmare. And you're like,
yeah. Raleigh's the busier airport, right?
No, actually, Charlotte is the 6th busiest airport in the United States.
Okay.
It is. Raleigh is, and then that's why Raleigh's my preferred, because Raleigh is usually, actually Greensboro is close to me. And in Greensboro, I think it's really bad if there's 3 people ahead of me in the TSA line. That's a bad day.
It's a wonderful airport. You park close, everything's close there.
Yeah, my daughter lives in Virginia right now. She flies out of Greensboro a lot when she comes out here, and I've heard. I mean, there's some every airport's not the same. I don't know. Have you guys ever flown through Miami? That was.
We've been doing cruises. You go through Miami.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a mobility disability there, if you have a mobility device that's not a wheelchair in Miami, that's rough. But that's a hike. That airport.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like DFW. If you're flying America through DFW, you could be a mile away from your next gate.
Yeah. Well, I can get around in DFW in about 10 minutes, though. I can, if you use the train, you can get around pretty quick. But Miami, I think, and Atlanta for me were pretty, yeah. But I can't. I just, yeah. They're not all built the same, and yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah, it is. Well, listen, you know what, Kevin, I've really appreciated you being on with us tonight. It's been a fun conversation. I knew when we talked earlier today that we'd have some interesting conversations, so I'm glad you were able to make it. And we'll say goodbye to the audience. You can hang around for just a second. So for those of you that are watching, if your subscribe button is still red, that's a warning sign. It means you have to punch the button that says subscribe, so that red light will go out. It's it is a warning sign. But no, we appreciate everybody that does subscribe, that watches. Oh, okay, we got a quick question. Yes, absolutely. Ask the question.
Yeah, please.
Hopefully, so we're going to get a question here in just a second. There's usually a delay with all of these on the stream, so it may be a minute or two.
Yeah, while they type up that question, I just want to thank you too. I don't know if you've put the plug in for the website you shared with me.
Okay. So there we have the challenge. So, and that's got to be tough.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess the one thing that if the knees don't bend, you pretty much are going to have to look at booking at least in the Comfort Plus so that you get the extra leg room. Ideally, if you can get the first two rows or the first row right behind first class, there's the question. Now I don't know the answer.
I don't think that there is. The Air Carrier Access Act is very specific in its equal access to flights, and if you have a disability, you get to board before first class. They have to provide assistance. They have to provide a wheelchair if it's on board, if it's available. But I don't think that they have to do it without extra. And I know that doesn't seem right, but just to give you an example of how much work that air carrier access needs to have, earlier last year, Senator Bob Casey actually submitted a bill to the Senate and I was shocked because I thought the air carrier access was a little bit more comprehensive, requiring airlines to provide closed captioning and interpreters for their in-flight announcements and entertainment. And sure enough, I couldn't believe that didn't exist already, but I traveled 3 or 4 times since that bill was introduced. And sure enough, they don't all have captions and none of them have interpreters. And it makes a lot of sense that you would want that, obviously, for emergency information. So, to your question, I know that it's, that would make more sense, Pam, actually. Yeah. I just don't think that it's by default. I think that it would be a reasonable accommodation request. With that request, obviously, you'd have to provide some doctor's information, but I don't think that just asking for it would work. It would be a reasonable accommodation request. I mean, there's a lot of logistics involved in where you seat people. And I think that the Air Carrier Access Act even says that for some certain types of accommodations, they need 48 hours notice. Yeah. So I think that, Pam, that's a good comment, Pam. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, here's one thing, and I did an interview about this a while back, and you may not even know this, but did you know that there is no requirement for the airlines to have any way to safely evacuate a disabled passenger from an airplane?
I believe that, actually, because I've been part of a mock tabletop exercise where there were no plans. I believe it.
Oh.
Yeah, because I did an interview. And because this lady introduced I want to say she had a device that would help transfer from the aisle wheelchair to the seat. Yeah, thank you, Pam, and I'm
Yeah.
glad she was able to help you, Cal 8987. But and it also serves as an evacuation because on the slide, especially if somebody has no upper body strength or anything,
Oh yeah, yeah,
you're risking your life to do it, and like I said, it was just kind of interesting that was one of the things that I didn't know they didn't have to have. I would have assumed that they had to have a plan and training, but they don't. And I thought it was interesting. I just saw a thing now. There's a it's a comment period for I think for FAA or whoever controls the airline transit about having a way to secure wheelchairs in the cabin so that people that especially have specialized wheelchairs, that they can actually bring them into the cabin and strap them in place.
yeah.
So that that they can it doesn't help going down the slide, but for everything else that person needs in flight, it will make a huge difference for them.
Yeah, and for those comment periods for FFA, I would advise, to just encourage everyone to make those because, when that happens, at least I'm not as familiar with FAA, but when the DOJ does it, it's one of those proposed rulemaking suggestions, which means that we're thinking about creating a rule, but we really don't know what to put in it, So the feedback is really critical, and I would imagine FAA operates the same way. So I certainly would have. But I like what Pam just said. I think it's sad they have no plan. That should be illegal. I agree. I was part of a tabletop exercise that was in a building on a program that was operated with a combination of state and local government employees. And what we found in the tabletop exercise when we tried to evacuate the building is that if we just followed all of the policies from the state and the county that was involved, no one at the state or the county was actually permitted to even assist someone with a disability to get out of the building. What it took was you actually had to bring in EMTs and rescue. And that's a problem if you don't have EMT and rescue standing by on a burning building, to help. So that means that if everyone in the building is evacuating and they're an employee, there's a chance that no one's going to be a good Samaritan because their policy says you cannot touch someone's mobility device, and that person has to stay in this safe area near a stairwell or something until a firefighter can get there. And then what does the firefighter do? He's got to operate that temporary stair chair, and it takes several people to carry somebody down with those devices. So, but it was a very good exercise because it made us understand, we need a plan, So I'm kind of surprised to hear that given the volume of people that the airlines deal with, that's not the case. So that's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's just absolutely insane. This like I said, this lady that represented the company, their company sells these devices to so that you have something. But that still doesn't mean the fact that yeah, Pam's growling now.
Yeah. Yeah. Got a lot of work to do, Cal.
Oh, there we go. I missed that one.
I do, yeah.
And it's just thinking it is sad because the population, a lot of us are getting older, and we get to the point. My last trip, I learned how much older I was after I climbed a big rock and a lighthouse, and then I just about needed a scooter for a couple of days because my poor knees were complaining. But as the population ages, there's more and more people using mobility devices. There's more and more people traveling with challenges. And again, these are people that a lot of times have the money to travel, but they don't realize in some cases they're taking their life in their hands more than the typical passenger when they get on an airplane.
Yeah. You're taking a risk. Like I said, there's if the infrastructure is not there, it is definitely a risk.
I think that if they keep shrinking the aisles of the airplanes, if there's a disaster, nobody's going to get out in a reasonable amount of time. This last flight, I've never seen one.
We were on an A321 for Delta, and normally you can carry like a laptop case or something behind you without it being too much trouble. This one you had to turn it sideways because it would not roll down the aisle, and you're like, okay, and just one more thing.
Yeah. We got a lot of work to do for sure.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate the audience who stayed with us so long for this. We a little longer than normal, but what Kevin had to say was A, very interesting, and B, very important. So we're glad that you were here with us.
Oh,
Again, like I said, and by the way, if you haven't hit the like button, do me a favor, hit the like button, because that makes YouTube know they should share this information with other people. And we'll see everybody next Friday.
thanks,
Thanks
guys.
a lot. Bye.